Excellent. Well, thank you for having this great event. And really excited to see so many folks here talking about environmental justice. So my name is Stephanie Herbst. I work for the Department of Ecology, and I'm going to be talking today from more of the grant and loan perspective, more of the funding side. I am a project manager and a financial manager based out of our Ecology's headquarters office in Lacey. Abby, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm Abbey Stockwell. I also work for Ecology. I am a municipal stormwater permit writer for the state. And so I'm going to pipe in the middle of this presentation and share how we are connecting environmental justice related issues with stormwater management regulatory tools. I'll hand it back to Stephanie. Thanks.
Excellent. Great. And everyone, feel free to, as your questions come up, feel free to place them in the chat. We just won't be maybe unmuting or monitoring the chat throughout the presentation, but I don't want you to lose those questions. So feel free as you are experiencing it, place it in the chat and we'll get back to them. All right, so I'm going to start by kind of taking an overarching view of this data might look familiar to some of us. This data is from the Washington Tracking Network's Environmental Health Disparities Map. And the data evaluates environmental health risk factors in Washington communities. It estimates a cumulative environmental health impact, ranking each census tract throughout Washington state and reflecting pollutant threats and vulnerabilities that may affect people's risk to environmental pollution. So each community is ranked on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most affected. And as you can see, these data show that in areas of 8, 9s, and 10s, we have also, so 8, 9s, and 10s are going to have the greatest environmental health disparities. And as we get into those greater environmental health disparities, the percentage of people that identify as white decreases. On this map, those are represented in colors of blue. And then those that identify as people of color are increasing as we have more environmental health disparities ranked. So we have greater populations of people of color in areas that experience greater environmental health disparities. A similar trend is seen for people that experience poverty and environmental health disparities. So in those greater ranking areas of 8, 9s, and 10s, there's also, well, throughout the entire EHD ranking, there's a linear association between rank and poverty. So those that are in the highest poverty ranking are sorry, EHD census tract of ranked of 10 have more than twice or close to twice of that of the EHD of 1. So you can see EHD 10 versus EHD of 1, almost twice as much in EHD 10. And for shorthand, I am going to be referring to some of these data as EHD. That's standing for environmental health disparities. And again, this is through the Washington Tracking Network's environmental health disparities map. So as we see, a similar trend occurs for living in areas with more environmental hazards, and pollution is often associated with a shorter lifespan. So this figure illustrates the difference in life expectancy compared to the state average. The state average here is 80.5 years. And those that are in a environmental health disparities rank of 1 lived on average 5.7 years longer than those in census tracts with the highest environmental health disparities rank of 10. So there's about a 5.7-year difference between those that live in areas that have lower environmental health disparities and those that live in areas with really great environmental health disparities. So as we can see, there is a problem, and these areas of low-income communities and people of color are disproportionately impacted by pollution, which can lead to higher levels of exposures to environmental hazards and higher risk of adverse health outcomes. These exposures are then compounded with factors such as racism, stress, and systematic discrepancies, creating burdens to access services. As Washington's Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Ecology is committed to protecting, preserving, and enhancing Washington's environment for current and future generations. Washington Department of Ecology works for all people, and it's embedded into our mission statement. So, all Washington residents, regardless of income, race, ethnicity, color, or national origin, have a right to live, work, and recreate in a healthy and clean environment. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the key terms and definitions related to environmental justice. And then Abby's going to speak a little bit more about how EJ overlaps with the municipal stormwater general permits. And then I'm going to come back and speak a little bit more about the environmental justice in some of the grant and loan applications and our expectations and considerations in EAJ there. So this is a reminder of how we define environmental justice, how the Department of Ecology does. I highlighted two things here, fair treatment and meaningful involvement. Each one of these has their own definitions. I'm not going to go through all of the words on the screen, but fair treatment is no group of people should bear the disproportionate burden of environmental harms and risks. And then meaningful involvement is that every an affected community must have the opportunity to participate in decisions that affect their environment or their health. They must have access to information in plain language, and they must have the ability to influence the outcome. A few more definitions, and I realize that this slide is pretty overwhelming, has a lot of words on it. These words and concepts are not mutually exclusive. So therefore, it's not absolutely essential that you get the definition quote unquote correct, but just have a general understanding of who lives in maybe your project area, who maybe relies on your project, or who is impacted by the stormwater running off of your area, who may be harmed or benefited by a project that you're considering. So they do have some differences, like I said, but they often overlap and compound each other. For simplicity today, we can think of vulnerable populations as those a group of people that have factors like age, ethnicity, health status, or identity that create a higher risk of poor health outcomes. Whereas overburdened communities is going to be a geographic area where vulnerable populations face compounded environmental health harms and impacts. Vulnerable populations is a group of people, whereas overburdened community is going to be a geographic area. And then some agencies may use the term underserved population, which has a slightly different meaning to vulnerable populations, but it is similar. Underserved community or underserved populations implies that there are systematic barriers like cost, language, or location that make it harder to access resources or services. At this point, now that we've kind of gone over some of those key terms, I'm going to hand it over to Abby, and she'll speak a little bit more on how we review the stormwater permits and what we're looking for with environmental justice with those.
Great, thank you. Yes, so I am going to get into an overview of how we use a specific regulatory tool, our municipal stormwater permits, and try to connect environmental justice related issues with stormwater management. We can move on to the next slide. I'm going to focus in on our phase 1 and our phase 2 municipal stormwater permits. We do have one other municipal stormwater unicorn, just slightly off around the bend, off screen, for our Washington Department of Transportation. But today we're talking about these, our phase 1 municipal stormwater permit, which applies to our largest, most urban areas of Washington, especially specifically in Western Washington. And then we have two phase 2 municipal stormwater permits, one for Western Washington and one for Eastern Washington, and these apply to our smaller urban areas. Next slide, please. And just for anyone that may be wondering, these municipal stormwater permits are regulating stormwater discharges from what we call the MS4, or the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. So this is the publicly owned and operated stormwater system that's designed to collect all that rainwater, stormwater runoff from the buildings, from the streets, from the sidewalks, and move it away, convey it to the nearest stream, wetland, lake, Puget Sound, or river, not to a wastewater treatment plant to be treated. So next slide, please. These municipal stormwater permits have a big problem to address because they're dealing with a very public landscape. And so there's lots of sources of pollution to this public stormwater system. Next slide, please. And, you know, the way we use the land every day is contributing to the pollutant sources that are getting into this MS4 system. So, and most of our landscape, our built out landscape, was developed before stormwater controls were even required, or we even had stormwater permits to deal with. So we have a big issues to deal with, and these municipal stormwater permits are really important for how they direct cities and counties to develop a stormwater management program to improve water quality in our really important waters of the state. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the permit coverage, the phase 1 and phase 2 permit coverage areas in Washington state. And it's not the best visual because it's a little bit hard to see, but you can make out those blue areas are our phase 1 permit coverage areas, and then the green areas are our phase 2 permit coverage areas. And yeah, I think you can see the pointers pointing them out. We have some little islands of urban areas in eastern Washington in green, up to the north and southwest as well. And again, it's covered, it's, you know, the municipal stormwater regulations are population-based. And so that's what starts the applicability of these permits, is where you have a lot of people, a lot of urbanization. Next slide, please. So our municipal stormwater permits, as you can tell, they've come out in different phases. Our phase 1 permits were first issued in 1995. Our phase 2 permits were first issued in 2007, and so they're reissued every 5 years. We've got a pretty good track record for that in Washington state. And with the 2019 permit reissuance, we started to hear a really strong public call for addressing environmental justice issues through our stormwater management programs and with our stormwater management program. And so we took a hard look at our stormwater permit requirements. I don't have a slide for this, unfortunately, but our stormwater management, our municipal stormwater permits require a stormwater management program, which is quite comprehensive in requiring cities and counties to implement broad programs to address stormwater quality. And they include education outreach, searching and eliminating illicit discharges into their system, addressing runoff from new and redevelopment projects, and the list goes on. So we took a close look at these stormwater management programs to see how can we connect environmental justice with water quality. And with the 2019 permit, we established some environmental justice related requirements, and we continued that look and requirements with the 2024 update that came out last summer. Next slide, please. So one thing I'll highlight in the municipal stormwater permits where you find these environmental justice related requirements is associated with this term overburdened communities. And you heard Stephanie talk about it. With the 2019 permit, we used a definition from EPA. With the adoption of, or the passage of the Washington Healthy Environment for All HEAL Act in 2021, we were able to align our definitions with our 2024 update to match the Washington state definition. So now we use an overburdened communities definition in the municipal stormwater permits. It matches the Washington HEAL Act definition and includes these terms, vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities. And we use these terms to focus in on some of the municipal stormwater permit requirements. Next slide, please. So one of the elements of the stormwater management program is public involvement. And when permittees, our cities and counties, are conducting stormwater management planning activities or planning to implement their stormwater management program, they're asked to involve their overburdened communities. So that's one way we try to connect the stormwater management program is through this public involvement program. Next slide, please. In public education and outreach, overburdened communities can be a priority audience for bringing and addressing stormwater quality impacts or concerns. So that's another area or program element that touches overburdened communities. Next slide, please. Municipalities are required to map their stormwater systems to know where their stormwater infrastructure is really important so that they can respond to spills, so that they can maintain it, so that they can know where to put stormwater BMPs where it's really important. And with the 2024 update, there's a new requirement to know where your overburdened communities are in association with your MS4, your stormwater infrastructure. Next slide, please. In Western Washington, we have, well, I guess we also have the same requirement in Eastern Washington. We just don't have a stormwater planning element, but permittees are asked to think about how they can use their long-range planning efforts to leverage stormwater or tree canopy for stormwater management. And when they're thinking about how they can use their existing canopy on their public lands that they own and operate for stormwater, we ask them to consider how they can maintain or even increase canopy in overburdened communities, because often we know overburdened communities have a lack of canopy in very high amounts of impervious surface is usually typical. So those are some considerations we're asking permittees to consider and figure out. Next slide, please. And then in Western Washington, there is a requirement to look at these areas of existing development where development occurred before stormwater controls were required by permit, and where stormwater controls are needed for flow control or runoff treatment. And to think about where they can install those, what we would call a stormwater retrofit. And when these stormwater retrofits can benefit overburdened communities, those are the types of projects we're incentivizing the permittees to implement. So that's another way we try to get at benefiting overburdened communities is through leveraging retrofits in areas of existing development to improve water quality. Next slide, please. So that's a very, very quick run through of where our stormwater management programs through the municipal stormwater permits touch EJ-related issues and requirements. And this is an aspect of the permit that will likely go on and continue. And what I've seen since it's been implemented, or I guess since these permits have been issued, are a lot of stormwater professionals getting together and trying to figure out how to make this work, how to connect our stormwater management program with our overburdened communities. And in fact, Lori here at Washington Stormwater Center has been a big part of that, convening not just one, but two environmental justice related discussion groups, one for overall discussions, but also one focused on municipal stormwater permits. So that's been really great. And I know there's also those kinds of conversations, those work groups happening at the local level as well. We talked a little bit about meaningful engagement. I think that's still something that we're all, as government officials, still trying to work out and figure out and do well, and still room for improvement there. I think it's challenging to engage the public on stormwater just in general, and then when it becomes more layered in lots of different things going on right now, it's just a challenging topic. But just to jump on my slide a little bit, when you can leverage existing community relationships, that's where we've seen a lot of benefits happening. There's a lot of existing groups out there that can connect jurisdictions and bring communities together around the topic of stormwater, and just that's really interesting thing that's been happening. And then I've also seen a lot of mapping tools being created or refined locally based, overburdening communities, environmental justice is a very local issue. And so while EPA or the state can develop mapping tools to help get us started, it's really on the local level where ground truthing or refining of those tools is happening. And I think that's really great. And I believe that's my last slide, so I'll hand it back to Stephanie. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. And also to our attendees, feel free to place things in the chat as they come up again. So I'm going to transition a little bit away from the stormwater permits, but also kind of building on the permits. As Abby just spoke, one of the things that the permit is encouraging cities and counties to look more into are those retrofit projects in overburdened communities. And retrofit projects are one of several projects that I will look for applications for as part of the Water Quality Combined funding program. It's not all retrofit projects, but oftentimes a lot of our funding does go to retrofit projects. And so having a retrofit project in an overburdened community would be more competitive. And I'll talk a little bit more about the values of the projects and how we look into that. And then I wanted to say too that I evaluate stormwater projects that apply for the Water Quality Combined Funding Program. So this may not be how every grant program in ecology evaluates projects, but it is something that all stormwater project managers like myself will look for. So just a little caveat that I'm not speaking for all of ecology here or even all of ecology's water quality program, but we are aligning within ourselves to create the Water Quality Combined Funding Program and then to evaluate all of the applications. And because this is a combined funding program, we typically uh, receive just one application, and then as a program, we assign different funding opportunities. And so we would assign whether it's a stormwater grant that we're applying for or that we're able to provide, or a loan, or maybe it's a non-point project and it comes from a different pool of money. But it's all one application. And then another little caveat as we transition away from municipal stormwater permits, you may have noticed that Abby spoke of permittees. I'll be speaking more about applicants, and sometimes those are interchangeable. So permittees are going to be cities and counties. And with the Water Quality Combined Funding Program, we also provide funding to cities and counties. And sometimes it can be nonprofits and a few other organizations may apply for different types of funding. But primarily for stormwater projects, we are still looking at just the cities and the counties. So within the Water Quality Combined Funding Program, we look for the feasibility and the potential benefit of a project. A project is considered valuable when it considers both feasibility and offers potential benefits. Or in other words, getting back to our EJ definitions here, has the applicant, meaning a city and county that's applying for a water quality water quality combined funding, have they demonstrated meaningful involvement? And then has the applicant demonstrated fair treatment? So together, between feasibility and potential benefit, if we incorporate both of those, then we're going to be able to confidently say that this project has value. Breaking it up a little bit further, our final application score is made up of 450 points from project feasibility. So how will this project be done? And then 500 points with water quality benefit score, or should we do this project? So assuming that we can build it, should we even be doing it? And when I say build it, again, those are oftentimes retrofit projects, but we also fund stormwater planning projects. And if you are not a city or a county, I should also say that there's opportunities to partner with a city or a county. And so please don't let that limit you from looking into our funding opportunities, because oftentimes we see projects where it is a partnership, and that can mean a lot of different things. We're also looking at private partnerships. So through the CPP3 program, and that's a mouthful, but it stands for community-based public-private partnerships. And that's a relatively new funding program through Ecology, where public entities can provide funding on private land for some of the retrofit projects or some planning projects that they're doing. So if you are interested in getting funding, it's always good to reach out to an ecology representative so that you can kind of know a little bit more before you apply. And another way to think about our value is through this value equation. So when we get an application, we're going to be looking at what's the change in the water quality, or in other words, what's the water quality benefit that we're getting from this project? And then what are some of these other co-benefits? So it's oftentimes not enough to just get the water quality benefit, but we really want to know, like environmental justice is considered an other benefit or an environment or a co-benefit that will arise from doing the project. So if a project with an already high water quality benefit will alleviate burdens in an overburdened community, then it will have a co-benefit that will increase the project's overall value even further. So what we ask of our grant applicants is all included in our funding guidelines, and specifically under Appendix K. Our funding guidelines are published every year in the Water Quality Combined funding webpage. And then Appendix K provides details of what's expected of our applicants for community engagement and environmental justice. So I will provide links to EJ resources and definitions and describe related policies by providing just one reference is going to get you to all of those resources. Um, so on the next slide, I'll be going over some EJ resources, and I'll place one of the most important ones to note of for stormwater projects into the chat. And then, but Appendix K is a great place to start, especially if you're thinking about a project and maybe you don't know where to begin to incorporate an EJ into your project. This is going to walk you through how Ecology evaluates projects and considers an EJ, and then how applicants should first come in and consider EJ and what we expect to see in your application. So the first thing that we expect of our applicants is that you learn about the geographic area of your project. Who are you going to reach with the project? What communities live, work, and recreate there? What is the geographic extent of your project? So remember, stormwater does not stay in one spot. Think about the downstream impacts of your project all the way down to the receiving water body. Using data analysis and some of the resources that I'll show you in just a moment, research who will be affected by your project and consider any underserved, overburdened, or vulnerable populations in this analysis. And then also take it one step further and identify any leaders in the community that may have interest in your project. So as I alluded to, here's a list of resources that are available to you to understand the current conditions of your project area. At a minimum, I recommend that you look at Water Quality Atlas and then the Washington Tracking Network's Environmental Health Disparities Map. And that will pinpoint you to maybe want to explore some of these other resources. For example, if you find in the Washington Tracking Network's EHD map that there are a significant population that has limited English understanding, then go to the limited English proficiency map to understand a little bit better about what your areas and projects outreach needs are. The Water Quality Atlas will also allow you to understand the water quality benefits better. It's going to have basic demographic information, but not as comprehensive as the EHD map. I like to use the Water Quality Atlas as a way to understand where my stormwater is really going and what sort of other planning projects, or if it's an impaired water body, what else is going on in the watershed. And all of that information, the more information you can provide in your application, the more competitive your application is going to be. It's really going to be showing us that, okay, you have a clear understanding of who's going to be impacted. And unfortunately, EPA's EJ screening tool and the Council on Environmental Quality's Climate and Environmental Justice screening tool have been recently removed from our federal resources, so I have not placed them here. But we do have a Washington State one for overburdened communities of Washington State. This is in alignment with the Climate Commitment Act and HEAL Act. It really shows yes or no if a project is occurring in an overburdened community, since an overburdened community is defined by the geographic area. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, please note the stormwater funding requirements. So this is the webpage that I really want everyone to make note of. Hopefully, you can refer to it in the future when you're interested in applying for funding that pertains to a stormwater project. Um, Even if you're not able to apply for our funding, it gets you it walks you through how to do a project from start to finish and how environmental justice can be considered. It's also going to point us to the funding guidelines, which are updated every year. And it's that Appendix K that I'm walking us through. And then you can get to Ecology's Office of Equity and Environmental Justice as well. So as promised, I'll go ahead and pop that one into the chat. Okay, and then I will move on. All right, so after you've identified the current conditions, then identify the anticipated outcomes or the goals of your project. So outcomes may include behavior change, results, or water quality impact. They should be measurable and they can occur by implementing your project. So use metrics and reference sources. And then when you reference sources in your application, include any plans or documents that you have referenced in the actual upload section of your application. Just saying, oh, we've done previous planning work is oftentimes not enough because if it's not in your application, unfortunately, we can't include it in the application evaluation. Um, so please either provide a copy of it or provide a link to it in a separate area. We like to see those in the uploads. Excuse me. And then create mechanisms for the public to participate in meaningful ways to inform the planning, design, implementation, and evaluation of your project. So this is where you can include documentation of your public engagement plan, or if you've already completed your public engagement, include the community outreach results in your application. And then use all this information that you've gathered so far to improve your project's planning and create greater environmental justice. So not enough to just, do the research, but then how are you going to distribute harms across a broader geographic area, maybe a people group or over time? So you're not just burdening or creating harms to the same group of that might be experiencing other harms in that area. And then consider how you can alleviate burdens for communities who have historically and continue to be the most exposed for environmental pollution. So reach communities that you have not engaged through typical or your current public processes. Prioritize your investments and time in areas that lack services. And as always, as you do this environmental justice assessment and you put together a grant application, you can always contact me or any of your ecology project managers. We do have all of our contact information published, and you can also find me in the funding guidelines. And at the end of the slideshow as well. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, particularly related to environmental justice, and to weigh any options that you have or discuss priorities as you put your application together. And then finally, in your application, tell us how you plan for project evaluation. So how will you monitor project success? Examples include community feedback surveys, interviews, focus groups, observations. If behavior change is desired from the focus audience, how will you measure your project's impact on the audience's behavior change? Make sure that your plan can be adjusted during the project to incorporate the lessons you learned. So that's that getting at that evaluation piece. Okay, so now that you have really done all the background information, you've thought through where are the harms and benefits related to my project, where can I put this information, this environmental justice information into the application? Well, I get this question quite frequently, and there is no specific spot. It's really that designed to be that our application it includes environmental justice and that just like how this or this bike is embedded into the tree here, this is actually a screenshot from on Vashon Island. Environmental justice should be embedded into the application. So environmental justice isn't just a checkbox on the application, it's embedded into the application, into the project itself. And it should be apparent throughout the application that you've done your research. That said, there are specific places in the applications, particularly in the project planning and schedule and water quality and public health improvement forms that specifically ask for EJ considerations. And I'll go more into depth on those on the following slides. Also, remember to upload any supporting documentation, including your community engagement plan or outreach results into the uploads. On the left-hand side of this slide, we have a couple of example application questions that specifically relate to EJ and feasibility. And then on the right-hand side, I have a few questions that evaluators, such as myself, might ask ourselves as we review applications. So I ask, is this project going to provide multiple benefits? What are those co-benefits? Is environmental justice one of them? Has the applicant referenced environmental justice resources? Do they clearly have a clear understanding of who's going to be impacted? What are the community leaders and partners? We're trying to get away from using the term stakeholders, although stakeholders is still mentioned in our application. But what I'm really asking is not just limited to who are your funding partners or maybe the cities or counties that you're working with, but who are the interested parties? Who are the community leaders? What businesses may be involved? What school groups? What nonprofit groups? Landowners? Will this be on a privately owned land? And jumping ahead there, if it is on a privately owned land, do you have the landowner agreement? That's going to potentially impact your readiness to proceed score. If it requires more than a landowner agreement and requires an easement or an acquisition, um, where is that on your schedule and your budget? And then have you demonstrated that there's going to be public engagement? What public engagement plan do you have for the project? Or if you've already completed it, what was learned through that process? And again, without this information, this will impact your readiness to proceed. An impact to tribes has to be described in every application, and cultural resources review oftentimes is included in all applications that have ground disturbing activity. So retrofit projects or design projects that include geotechnical work. Cultural resources review, we have a lot of information on that website about cultural resources review, and it should be included in the schedule and the scope of work and the budget. So considered inherently into the project and um, how to respond to the tribes if they have a comment. On the water quality and public health improvements page, similarly, we have some questions that relate to EJ. And then these are some questions that I ask myself as I go through and read some of these applications. I ask myself again, are we seeing multiple benefits? It's not just water quality improvements, it's water quality and public health improvements. That's intentional because we want to hear about what that other bit is. Are we relating to another planning effort? And again, if you are relating to larger planning efforts or previous planning efforts, include a include those in the application, the actual document. I like to see sometimes we have stormwater management action plans. Provide a copy of the stormwater management action plan. That's super helpful for us and prevents us from having to limitedly look at your planning efforts if it's not included in your application. Unfortunately, we can't include it in the evaluation and in the score. What is the connection of water quality and all communities? So again, water flows downstream and the benefits might not be seen on site. Oftentimes we don't see the benefits on site and we see it more in the receiving water body. What is the state of that receiving water body? Who is using it? And how are they using that water body? Um, what's the value of the project over time? And who's going to be responsible for maintaining the benefits? Maintenance is oftentimes overlooked in the one piece of an application that may not score very well if maintenance is not considered. Gets at that longevity of a project. Okay. I have, I'm just doing a quick time check here. Yeah, I think I have time to go into a couple more examples, and then we'll go back and answer any questions. So one example that I oftentimes see in applications is that the applicant has not described previous outreach or may not have a community engagement plan. And because environmental justice is embedded into the project and into the application, this is going to impact many questions for feasibility and potential benefit. Um, so it's going to reduce your feasibility score because we don't know if there's going to be meaningful involvement. If there's no community engagement plan, then there's not really an opportunity to provide meaningful involvement or to be able to impact decisions. And then if there's not outreach or a community engagement plan, then we don't really know if this is considered fair treatment. We don't know if everyone in the community is involved in the project or if the community is aware of the project or encouraging of the project. And I have seen some instances where the community actually disagrees with the planning effort or the design work that an applicant might be putting forward. So we want to make sure that by having a community engagement plan and previous outreach, that it's ready, the project is ready to go, and that it is going to be perceived as a benefit to those that it impacts. Um, Taking a step from the evaluator's perspective now. So, evaluators from ecology will provide our comments, and these comments are available to members of the organization that applied for funding. So, if you are with a city or a county and you apply for water quality combined funding, then you can have access to what we call the evaluation scorecard. And this scorecard is available through Ecology's Administration of Grants and Loans, or EAGLE, and it shows the exact criteria that the project is quote unquote graded on. So we also have published resources like our stormwater application prep tool that is on that link that I've provided. So if you haven't yet applied and you want to learn more about the specific application questions and how to best answer them, you can also go to that application prep tool, and that's going to walk you through really each question that's in the application and then how to best be scored on them. But this is a good place if you already have a project or if you, say, applied for a project that wasn't competitive in a previous grant cycle year, you can go ahead and see what your evaluators, what they wrote to you, um, and why maybe you've lost points or where you really succeeded. Um, let's see. I think I'm gonna go ahead and skip through this pretty quickly. I guess I just wanted to hone in on the idea that, um, again, if an application is missing something, um, not doing, not walking through those steps for environmental justice, as described in Appendix K, that it can really have a negative impact on the score. And there's several questions within the evaluation scorecard that might touch on. So as an evaluator, we ask ourselves, how well did the recipient or the applicant describe the scope of work? And does the scope of work just represent a complete description of the project? And so each of these will be given a score, and that makes up your total ranking. And if the applicant did not do these statements well, then the project may not rank as high or be as competitive in the final funding offer list, which we provide a draft offer list in January of every year and then a final in July of for the next year. Um, this is getting a little bit more into the weeds than maybe I want to be right now, so I'm just going to leave this here. But if you have any more questions on the evaluation scorecard, I'm happy to discuss. Other common problems that we see in applications and what we might be looking for is a reference to those previous planning efforts. And we want to know that all affected communities are described, so including those downstream. If there's not a clear understanding of the harms or the benefits of the project, then that's going to impact many points in questions, several questions. And you can ask if there's those that are harmed from the project, are they already in overburdened communities? Maps can help answer this, but it's really not enough to just say, oh, this is occurring in an overburdened community, or it's not. How, again, distribute any harms or benefits? How are you going to use that information to alter your project? And at what opportunities does the community have meaningful involvement to potentially change the outcome? Some examples of evaluator comments that relate to EJ. I've just pulled these from some previous ones that I've reviewed, and I've highlighted more, I guess, red flag. That sounds pretty harsh, even though none of these comments are particularly, um, terrible. Just we like to say how an application could have been improved. Um, and then I highlighted this comment as more of an orange. It's more of an orange flag. The comment was geographic extent is small. Evaluator used EJ Screen back when we had EJ Screen and Washington Tracking Network Health Disparities Tool. This project is not in an overburdened community. Um, that's an orange flag because, if your project doesn't occur in an overburdened community, it doesn't inherently mean that the application is not going to be competitive, or that the project is not considered a valuable project. It really does depend, and if that's the case, then it's not automatically a project that ecology won't fund or be involved with. We just want to see that there's other benefits tied to the project. And then this was a project that did really well in describing the previous planning efforts or the stormwater management action plan, and that the plan included an analysis based on EJ criteria. So not only did the application include that plan, but it also referenced the EJ criteria throughout the application. All right, I think we're ready for questions, and I did see one pop up in the chat. Um, Angela, I will read yours out loud, but feel free to unmute if you wanted to clarify. So, Angela, you said if you're working for a city or county permittee, you should definitely be looking at your capital improvement plan. Each permittee is required to have this plan updated and submitted to Ecology regularly. It will discuss which potential projects have been identified and prioritize what has funding and what needs funding to implement. Yeah, thank you, Angela. So not really a question there. Um I'm happy to hear that, yeah, you I think I've seen your name. Yeah, thank you for that information. Ariana, we have unsure if anyone here would know the answer, but is there a plan for environmental justice requirements for industrial stormwater permits in addition to municipal? I'm gonna let Abby take that one.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer either. The industrial general permit would be a good site to look into whether there's any upcoming plans on that. Sorry.
Abby, is that a question that we could reach out to Shannon to provide an answer for?
Yeah,
Okay,
that would be the best contact.
okay. We have 10 minutes left. Does anybody else have any questions for Abby or Stephanie? I see Bill has unmuted himself.
Yeah, first off, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for this. I guess a question for either Abby or Stephanie is, well, first off, a comment that there's been a lot of discussion since the 2024 permit came out about, and before that, about the change that an overburdened community is now a geographic area to bring it into alignment with the HEAL Act. And the recognition that there are a number of there's a number of people in different communities that that are now not captured in the definition because it's not representable as a geographic a defined geographic area that where those people are based on data, such as um, people that speak languages or people who don't have addresses. Has there been any latest thought in ecology about how to adapt the current definition, which there, I mean, there's a lot of rationale for having the permits match the other, state regulation definition, but has there been further discussion about how to deal with what was lost in ecology staff?
I can chime in. So I brought this question to our Office of Equity at Ecology and talked with our EJ coordinators and leadership there. And the takeaway I got from them was that this definition doesn't change. You can adjust your scale for geographic region to address the communities that you are trying to benefit or help out. So that was the feedback I received, is that the definition wasn't intended to limit you in scope or anything like that. It was just, you can adjust your scale to meet your needs. I don't know,
Yeah.
Stephanie, if you have any other advice or thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Because to be honest, this is one of the first that I've really thought about how the permit defines overburdened communities, rather than from a funding program, we're looking for overburdened communities and vulnerable populations. And they, like I said in the beginning, they're oftentimes in compounding and
Mhm.
related. So I think this is an example where maybe it's not a yes or a no on the like overburdened communities area, but you could still make a case for impacting multiple different vulnerable populations.
Mhm.
And that would, still, at least from a funding perspective, what we look for is vulnerable populations and overburdened communities. The HEAL Act also prescribes that we um, direct or have the goal to direct 40% of our funding to either one of those vulnerable
Mhm.
groups,
Mhm.
vulnerable populations or overburdened communities.
Okay.
Uh,
Well,
Maybe
thank
not
you.
a super clear-cut answer, but I
No,
guess
that's great. Well, this topic, I mean, it as it overlays on stormwater management is not super clear, and it's really
yeah,
important. And so I know I can speak for not just myself but other stormwater folks who really appreciate the continued work on the part of ecology staff to try to figure out how to do this in a government system that's based on documents and still recognize that the edges are difficult and we're not done yet. But so just thanks for your continued effort on it and great presentation. Thank you.
yeah. Thanks, Bill.
Susan, go ahead and unmute
Susan?
yourself.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Bill said. This is a great presentation. So thanks so much for putting this together. I've been learning a lot. I just wanted to say that you were talking about vulnerable populations in response to Bill's question, but the permit also calls out highly impacted communities. And so I think that's another way around the geographic aspect. I think of highly impacted communities as our tribes, and plus other, immigrant populations and things like that. But I also wanted to mention that the city of Olympia and a few other jurisdictions have really been working on plain talking their stormwater management plans and using a lot more graphics and things like that so we can have a more robust public involvement process with our stormwater management plans.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've seen a bit of, and it does make those plans much more engaging than just a document that's black and white text.
Yeah, I think in the past, those documents have been highly technical and very, very related to the specific permit requirements, which, is really, as you kind of mentioned earlier, Abby, it's not really going to be topics that are going to really engage the community. So really, thinking about, what would the community most want to hear about or engage with, and really highlighting those sections and kind of trying to minimize a little bit of the other while also including, what our plans are for the year.